No,
if they want
he has
it.
formally.
Yeah, it's the best way.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you folks. We'll call the meeting to order. The special meeting today is to deal with two matters. We begin with attendance. We don't have any apologies, although Councillor Stockwell's yet to appear.
There he is.
Here you go, in the nick of time. However, Councillor Jurizovic is attending by conference call, so we need a motion. There's a suggested one on screen. Moved Councillor Jackson.
You could have
Seconded Councillor Pardon. The motion is that we provide approval for Councillor Jurizovic to attend the council special meeting by teleconference. Anyone wish to discuss that? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Welcome, Joe.
Aye.
A man of few words, sometimes.
not
We head to this first item, which is the development application to reconfigure one lot into 24 lots at 28 Eenie Creek Road, Noosaville. I'm going to declare what I believe to be a perceived conflict of interest in the matter before us. Before being elected to the Sunshine Coast Council, I was a co-respondent with the council in an appeal against a refusal to expand the Noosa Civic Shopping Centre, and that, as you know, resides as part of the Shire Business Centre site. The applicant appealing the decision was then the property owner WA Stockwell Proprietary Limited. The appeal began in 2009. That appeal was for a very different development application than that which we're being asked to consider today. So I make this declaration in the interest of transparency, and I'll now relinquish the chair while the matter is determined.
Okay.
So, councillors, the process that Councillor Wellington has declared a conflict of interest. That requires someone else to assume the chair for that consideration. So I'll call for nominations for anyone to
I'll
chair the
move.
meeting.
Councillor Wilkie chairs
That
the
will be the
meeting
normal
in the
process.
absence.
Yep.
I'll second.
So moved by Councillor Pardon, seconded by Councillor Glasgow, that Councillor Wilkie chairs the meeting for the purpose of consideration of conflict of interest. All those in favour?
Yes.
Against?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. So I'll hand over chairperson to Councillor Wilkie.
Okay, councillors, so we need to determine whether Councillor Wellington has a real or perceived conflict of interest and whether he may remain in the room for the debate. For the purpose of moving this along, I'll move.
Can I suggest you also check whether there's any other conflicts of interest to be declared? It's probably a good thing to do as well.
Certainly.
Well, Councillor Wellington reminded me that I too would have a perceived conflict of interest because in 2015 I was secretary of the Noosa Parks Association, and as a secretary I sent in a submission about the then version of Noosa Civic, which was all about retail. So I would similarly have a perceived conflict of interest. I believe I can stay in the room to make that decision in an objective manner.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Stockwell.
Third time lucky. For the same application that Councillor Jackson just mentioned, I was then the president of the Noosa Residents and Ratepayers. I believe I was a signatory on a submission and also made public media comments in regard to that development, which was, I believe, by the QIC, and similar to the one that Councillor Wellington mentioned, is a vastly different development proposal. I believe I can stay in the room and treat the matter impartially and in the public interest, and seek councillors' vote on that.
I have a question for the CEO. Do we have enough councillors left in the room to vote on these matters?
You do. The quorum for a council is 4 for this council, so you have Councillor Pardon, Councillor Wilkie, Councillor Glasgow and Councillor Jurizovic. We can make a determination in relation to those matters. Just to be clear that none of the councillors who have declared a conflict of interest can make a determination or participate in a vote on any of the other councillors who have declared a conflict of interest. So Councillor Wellington, Councillor Jackson and Councillor Stockwell, difficult though may be, would have to remain mute for the consideration of this matter unless anyone has a question in relation to their declaration.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councillor Jurizovic. Could you stand, please?
I'm standing. I may too also have to declare a perceived conflict of interest on my past position as treasurer of the Noosa Residents and Ratepayers Association. I'm not 100% certain of the timing, but certainly I was treasurer for a number of years while Councillor Stockwell was the president, and if he has a perceived conflict, I likely would have a perceived conflict.
Yeah, Councillor Jurisovic, that application I think that was being talked about from QIC was while you were a councillor.
He'd already resigned.
You had already, so I don't know
Oh,
that
you've
you
got,
were, that was
okay,
in
so it wouldn't be
2000.
then, but there, I wasn't sure about the predating that when the remainder of the or the earlier update, which is one I thought Councillor Wellington was alluding to when he was a councillor. I wasn't been the treasurer of the Residents and Ratepayers Association. I think we had an objection to it at the time as well.
Just to clarify, my perceived conflict doesn't relate to the application by QIC, but rather to an earlier application by Stockwell Proprietary Limited. I don't believe anyone else has mentioned a similar perceived conflict in relation to that appeal. The case that councillors Jackson and Stockwell and yourself, Councillor Jurisovic, are referring to is a later appeal, which was an appeal under the QIC ownership and development application.
And my recollection is that Councillor Jurisovic was a councillor at the time that the council considered the QIC application.
It's not the QIC application I'm considering, it's the earlier application when Councillor Wellington was on the Sunshine Council. I would have been the treasurer of the Residents and Ratepayers Association. Councillor Stockwell may be able to help me here whether or not the Residents and Ratepayers Association had objection to that application at that time.
And I'll have to be honest and say, I know the matter was considered. I know Councillor Wellington from the Sunshine Coast Council approached us and talked to us about it.
No, hang on, we're talking about the
earlier one.
So I wasn't on the Sunshine Coast Council.
Oh no, well the one that I can think of that the ratepayers dealt with while Councillor Jurisovic was a treasurer was the Masters. No, it's a different side. So I don't think... Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. I knew it was on the site, but yes, you're quite right. It was the Masters application. I do stand corrected. Thank you.
So as I understand, Councillor Jurisovic's not declaring a perceived conflict of interest.
My understanding is that as a result of the information from Council as well, that yes, I would not have a perceived conflict of interest due to a timing matter as to which application was before Council at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Jurisovic. I'd like to move in relation to the Councillor Wellington's perceived conflict of interest, that it represents a perceived conflict of interest, and that Councillor Wellington may remain in the room to participate in the debate and vote on this matter. May I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
The reasons for my moving this, councillors, is that, as stated, the application was it was a totally different application. We have a separate application before us on this occasion, and I don't believe the two have any bearing on each other. And I believe that Councillor Wellington, it is a perceived conflict of interest because of that, the separation of the years and the nature of the application, and that he's able to assess this application on its merits. Any other councillors wish to speak to this motion? Put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Note that Councillor Jurisovic, Glasgow, Wilkie and Pardon in favour. Those against? There are none against. So that motion is carried. Mr. CEO, does that allow Mr.
No.
Councillor Wellington to take the chair?
You can't deal with, even though his has been dealt with, you can't deal with any of the others that
Yeah.
are there. You can only deal
Is that
with...
because it is similar?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Councillors, we now move on to Councillor Stockwell's declared...
Councillor Jackson will be next.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Jackson's declared conflict of interest. I'd also like to move that Councillor Jackson has a perceived conflict of interest in this matter, and that she may remain in the room to debate this matter, and I believe that she could handle this matter impartially. Have a seconder, please.
I'll second that.
Yeah, councillors, for the same reasons as articulated for Councillor Wellington, I believe the same situation applies to Councillor Jackson, and ask that you support this motion that Councillor Jackson remain in the room and take part in discussions on this matter, please. Any other councillors wish to speak on this matter? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Councillor Pardon, Wilkie, Glasgow and Jurisovic. There are no against. There are no against, so that's carried. Now, we now move on to Councillor Stockwell's declared conflict of interest, and again, I'd like to move the motion that this be considered a perceived conflict of interest, and that Councillor Stockwell may remain in the meeting room to participate in the debate and vote on this matter for the same reasons as articulated previously for the last two councillors. May I have a seconder, please?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Seconded, Councillor Pardon. All those in favour? Councillor Pardon, Wilkie, Glasgow and Jurisovic. No against, so the motion is carried. We now need a motion that...
No, that the motion was that you assume the chair for consideration of that conflict of interest. Now that that's been done, the chair automatically reverts back to the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Okay, we go back to consideration of item 1, of course, and this is a somewhat convoluted situation we're in, so I'm going to begin by asking Kim Rawlings to explain why it is we got to this position to hold a special meeting rather than dealing with this matter in the course of an ordinary round of meetings. And secondly, could you please outline what has transpired in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, sure, through the chair. Councillors, today you have in front of you a report on a reconfiguration of a lot application for what we locally know as the Shire Business Centre at 28 Eenie Creek Road, Noosaville. The proposal is to essentially subdivide the one lot into 24 lots. The officers have been working with the applicant for a number of months. The application was made late last year. And we've been working with the applicant to try and resolve a whole range of matters around this application and proposal. The applicant has extended the decision-making period previously to allow council officers to work with them to try and resolve the matters. We've had a series of meetings over the last couple of months, 6 or 7 meetings at least with the applicant to try and resolve a number of matters. However, in the last couple of weeks, the applicant has advised that they are no longer willing to extend the decision-making period, which is due on the 31st of October. Now, given that this application is code accessible, councillors will know that decisions need to be made before the decision-making period, otherwise the application goes what's known as deemed approval. Hence, we've set up a special meeting to get council to make that decision prior to the decision-making period finishing on the 31st of October. Around a week ago, I spoke to the applicant before we got to this point and set up a special meeting, offered them an opportunity to continue to work with council to resolve a number of matters. At that point, they advised no, they weren't willing to extend the decision-making period any further. So special meeting was set up and we are here now. At that point, we also advised the applicant that officers' recommendation would be a refusal because of the nature and quantum of issues that were unresolved at that point. Since the agenda coming out and the report last week, the applicant has now written to council advising that they are agreeable to a number of the outstanding matters. And just last night and then this morning, formal confirmation that the applicant is now willing and has formally requested to extend the decision period until the 22nd of November.
Just a question on that. If the decision period is extended to 22nd of November, that brings us into the next round of meetings to make a determination without a deemed approval at the next ordinary meeting.
Yeah, that's correct.
Any other questions, folks? I understand that staff prepared a possible deferral motion. Is that? Can you see that on the screen? There it is. I'll read that out. That council note the report by the coordinator planning to the special meeting, blah, blah, blah. and at the request of the applicant, defer consideration of the application to the November round of council meetings to allow council staff to undertake further discussions with the applicant.
I move, Mr.
Hang
Chair.
on, just before you get to that, can I suggest that we defer consideration of the application to 22 November? Is that correct? You need to have the date specific.
Yeah.
So may I just ask about that date? I am, because we've all received information that the applicant would like that to be the extension date, but you've just mentioned that it is not in line with the round of council
No, it
meetings.
No, it is.
is. The council
It is.
meeting, the official
It's
ordinary
21st.
meeting is on the 21st of November.
The day
The
before.
day before the 22nd.
So it could potentially be
Yes.
already there if the negotiations were
Correct.
complete by then.
I heard you move that, is that correct, councillor Jurizovic?
Yes, please.
I'll second it.
Seconded, councillor Glasgow. Do you wish to speak to it, councillor Jurizovic?
Only in the vein that I believe that staff and the applicant have been negotiating quite clearly towards a final resolution of this. Both I believe in my mind, fairly close to coming to terms. A little bit more time is what's required to potentially alleviate the challenges that are being met, and I'm quite happy with the applicant's request to extend that time period to allow that to happen.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Yeah,
Councillor
I
Jackson?
would like to speak, and first of all, I'd like to say that I'm very grateful to the applicant for their flexibility and the letter that we've all now received showing their responsiveness to what staff wrote in the staff report about the issues. There's quite a significant number of requested meet the staff about these things. And I think because, of course, these things are complex, it's a good idea to work that through, and now we an opportunity to do that over the next month. Also, I'd like to say, and I think it's important, given all those conflicts of interest we talked about, that, or potential perceived, is that previously there had been a move to have a retail centre, bigger shopping centre. And then council actually won an appeal against that. And in fact, this current application is totally in line with what council desires to see in this area around Noosa Civic, which is an activated multi-use centre, which is a much more useful and diverse opportunity for economic development for council. And so I'm really very excited about this opportunity.
I've got a question. It'll be to our director. In terms of when I read the letters we received last night from the applicant and our own report, there appears to be one substantive area where there still may be a difference of opinion about the appropriate legal interpretation around the koala, the impact of the old infrastructure agreement with the current requirements around koala conservation. So, is there a need to get have in this motion or to foreshadow any further legal advice, or is there a mechanism that we can find? I asked yesterday about the new planning scheme has this concept of a net gain. So we didn't go to offsets. We said where adverse impacts have been minimised, any residual impacts on ecological values are compensated for through suitable habitat replacement and replanting on site, which it won't be in this case, in the first instance, or in a way that results in a net gain and enhancement of the overall habitat values of Noosa Shire. Is there something we need to look into there in terms to resolve that, or is it just, I suppose, it's just foreshadowing the need to think a little bit more?
Short answer is there'll be a range of issues I think need to be addressed as we go through that. That'll be one of them. And if we need to get advice, we can.
I actually have a question related to Councillor Stockwell's question. The Noosa plan intends this area around Noosa Civic to be the Noosa Business Centre, and so does the draft new Noosa plan, the Shire Business Centre, the Noosa Business Centre. And as I understand it, the SEQ, the Southeast Queensland Regional Plan, also names this as a major centre.
Yeah.
Could it be that any applicant for developing this intended site would encounter the similar issues around the koala habitat matters relating to the state planning policies and other state matters, and perhaps the overlay about which has implications for koala habitat?
Yes, those provisions apply to the land. So yes, the current owner, applicant and future applicants, the issue would remain. The infrastructure agreement developed in 2003 does clearly state that future offsets and land cannot be required for environmental purposes. So there is no ability for council to condition or require that. It doesn't state that that future development, that environmental matters would not be considered as part of future development. And there, as the report outlines, since 2003 there's been changes in the state regulations specifically around koala, and so the state policy requires an assessment against the state planning policy and the relevant benchmarks, which is what the report does to advise council that is an issue, and ultimately the discretion about how council assesses any application against those benchmarks is council's discretion.
So what you're suggesting is it'll be a case-by-case basis once the lots are divested from the current owner and we get new applications?
The infrastructure agreement actually runs with the land, so future landowners also have the benefit of the infrastructure agreement. So again, the same issue will remain for future landowners.
You got what you needed out of that, Councillor Jackson?
Yes, I think so. So just to clarify, or perhaps there are some areas of land in Noosa which are national park, or where we've, as a council, just purchased ringtail Ural for specifically to manage habitat for koalas. This one is set aside especially for a major centre, and we are, as a council, have been supporting that through the Noosa planning plan. So would that not make, it couldn't be that this would therefore be always refused, could it?
Could be.
No, is the short answer, and not to preempt any future council decisions, but no, that's right. The strategic intent for this site is Shire Business Centre. The strategic intent for this site is not national park or environmental park. It's Shire Business Centre, but within the Shire Business Centre is a range of uses in a landscape park setting, you know, and that environmental and vegetation is considerations are still important as they are across the whole of the Shire.
Okay, Councillors Jurisovic and Jackson have spoken. Anyone else wish to speak?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
yeah,
Councillor
look,
Parton?
yeah, I will, Mr. Chair. And having not declared any conflict of interest, if I go back to 1996, you'll find somewhere in the library a front page that a bloke called Pardon owned a fruit shop, and he was very adamant that this particular site shouldn't go in the strategic plan, the 1997 strategic plan. And my colleague up there, Councillor Stockwell, will be well aware of the issues back then, and basically talked about, and it's in this report, with regards to impacts on the junction, Tewantin, Karoi, Pomona, all our shopping precincts. If we're going to keep our village shopping precincts, they're going to build this great, shopping centre over there in the middle of the bush, and thus direct the dollars that way. So I was opposed. The old council, we pulled it back in size, reduced the size of the original, of something like 60,000 square metres of shopping centre, etc., going to be constructed over there. It was virtually a regional shopping centre in a place like Noosa, where we didn't have the population and weren't unlikely in the near term anyway given our population, our planning scheme that says we'll fit carrying capacity about 63,000 people in the Shire, why would we need such a monolith over there? So I objected to that, and thus we have what we have today, a reduction in its size. Having said that, the good part of that plan in that precinct was the job creation. There's 1,100 jobs there at the moment, and thus if we get to an approval down the track, I believe we will. Yes, there's some issues, but I think they can be overcome. And Councillor Jackson's question was interesting with regards to the koala offsets, and Councillor Stockwell as well. Does that negate it ever being built? If you take that into allowance, you could say, you know, do nothing there. This council has a policy going forward to actually protect up to 50% of its shire, either national park or conservation zone. So when we're talking about koalas, we've already purchased, you know, you can talk about Fran's Lands, John's Landing, Euro, and many more blocks, more than I can remember now, that we've purchased for koala offset, and we continue to do that. So I think with regards to some of them issues, I think they can be overcome. You won't make an omelette without breaking an egg, and thus, you know, when you're knocking in roads and stuff like that, and infrastructure, you are going to do some damage to the trees, etc. It'd be ideal to keep it, but that's idealism. And the human being, part of the environment too. Probably the worst part of the environment is the human being, the destruction we do, but that's the way it is. So if we want the jobs, and we do, and we want the environment, it's about that balance of trying to get both and develop it the best way we can. Doesn't mean flatten everything. So it's about that negotiations, how we go about doing the development. So having said all that, I support the deferral. I think I've got to believe we can get there. I don't want to go down other paths. I think, and the intent of that job creation, and I think some of that part where we're putting some of that high density living, I think that'll activate. Shouldn't use that word, can you? Councillor Playford's not here, I can use that word. So you put people in a civic area, it comes alive. I mean, that's you know, after 8 o'clock over there, you know, through the week, what is it? Hardly anyone moving. It's a pretty dead area. So we call it the civic. Well, you need people. You need people to be moving around. We need the transit centre. We need that there. It's part of our traffic and transport. So if we condition that and get those particular things, developers don't like transit centres. They shove them in. What value to them? We could say, well, it brings people to your centre. Yeah, but they'll argue that people take all the parking up, and thus I lose me customers. So, but I think down the track we can get there on this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
I do have another question. It's still relating to the state planning requirements around koala habitat and environmental vegetation.
Get ready, Connor.
It's actually not for Connor. It's actually for Patrick and Kim. Previously, I mean, we have been discussing, I have spoken with both of you about this matter, and I think one of the things I was told was that due to the state planning policy and other state planning regulations, staff would have to recommend refusal, but then councillors as a council have discretion to approve. And I'm just wondering, are we still in this quandary where staff are going to be obligated in some way to recommend a refusal due to the state planning rules?
Good question.
What staff are obligated to do is assess the application against the planning scheme, the planning regulations, and the state planning policy. That's what we're obligated to do. That's what we've done, and that's what's in front of you. Staff are not obligated on that basis to recommend a refusal. No, staff are obligated to do the appropriate assessment considering all factors, and that, you know, and come to a recommendation that all factors have been considered appropriately, and the appropriate recommendation.
It's the most significant parcel of undeveloped land in the Noosa Shire, and it's worth taking the time to work with the applicant to get it right. The intention to reconfigure lots here is generally consistent with the future direction highlighted in the draft planning scheme, although the application in its current form fails to meet key aims of the Noosa Planning Scheme's Noosaville Locality Code and the State Planning Policy protections for biodiversity and natural hazards for a range of reasons, including the extent of the proposed clearing of koala habitat vegetation and identified feed trees and the size of the lots. It would be better to await a revised application which also addresses traffic safety concerns over the location of the transit centre and the adequacy of pedestrian and cycle links. The concept of a lot reconfiguration is supported in principle. However, for me, the extent of the vegetation removal remains a key concern at this stage. I support the motion to defer the application to allow the opportunity for more constructive dialogue between the applicant and the council, and hopefully reach an outcome that is more of a win-win for the community and the property owner. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stockwell.
Yes, so we're actually debating a deferral motion, and I think it's really important for council to think that we wouldn't be deferring this unless we're hopeful of a different outcome. We wouldn't be deferring it if we didn't think the only possible outcome is a refusal, and for me that's important to have up front, because when we look at what this subdivision application does, is it actually reflects our new planning scheme. It actually reflects a lot layout that will allow for the diversification and flexibility in business and community. So being able to have that extra time to see if there's some ability to resolve the outstanding matters, whether it be through the state planning policy around koalas, the one that hasn't been mentioned, which is also a significant one for this community, is the bushfire hazard management, going down the community titles direction, which the applicant has indicated they're prepared to do at this stage, may be an opportunity to resolve some of those concerns. So I think it's really important to understand that the issues that are requiring us to defer are ones that are about not the overarching desirability of the Shire Business Centre, but meeting required standards to ensure that subsequent development not only meets state planning policy, but is safe and usable for the intended purpose.
Councillor Glasgow.
Yeah, I'll support the deferral motion as well, because there's been some very interesting comments made around. Brian just made a good one then about flexibility of business and community, and we've always agreed that this is our very last shot at one of the most pivotal developments in the Shire, being the Shire Business Centre, aka the old Noosa Civic. It is a deferral motion that we can engage more in better dialogue with the applicant, and I fully support it. And like I said, this is the first step of many. It is only a subdivision approval. This is not, you know, there's still a lot of steps to go down the future, you know.
Well, of the Shire Business Centre, in accordance with the Noosa plan for future generations, it's likely the most significant, and it's important to remember that by other councillors. I'd like to thank the developer for their willingness to continue to negotiate for a mutually acceptable outcome in keeping with the Noosa plan, and take some more time to work through any of the planning issues as a sensible approach to reach a suitable outcome for the business centre. I think this is a major significant development for the Noosa region that the entire community has long awaited for, well over 20 years, and to defer for a few more weeks to try and reach a mutually agreeable outcome is a sensible approach from council.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We move on to the second item for today's consideration, and that is the Procurement and Fleet Branch Restructure and Position Establishment.
I'm happy to move that motion.
Oh, already?
I'll second it, Mr Chairman.
Moved Councillor Jackson, seconded Councillor Wilkie. We have Phil Parkin and Michael Shave here. Are there any questions,
I'll be
anyone?
finished before you get to the table.
I move we stack the puck.
Any questions, anyone?
I do, Mr Chairman. Question, on page 41 of the report under Finance, in terms of getting a full understanding of the cost implications of this restructure, you've mentioned that the new procurement officer role can be funded via the capital budget through procurement costing their time to capital projects. Could you just talk a bit about what that actually means, please, Michael?
Sure. Look, we've identified a bit of a gap there where our procurement team aren't appropriately capturing their time against capital projects they're involved with, so any tenders and quotes and so on. So what we've done a bit of analysis there, and we think there's between $50,000 and $100,000 there of funds that should be costed against capital projects. Currently, that's costed against the operating budget. So just by changing some of our work practice, we'll actually free those funds up in our operating budget, which will offset the cost of that additional position.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just before we get to a vote, I also acknowledge the reason we're here today is because Phil is announced his retirement in December, and he brought some unique skills. We were really getting a 2-for-1 deal with Phil over the last 6 years, and he did really well to come back after we de-amalgamated and help us out in that period. So we owe him a great debt for what he's done over that last 6 years. And as I said, it's really, this restructure is because we were getting 2 jobs for the price of 1 with what Phil was doing. So thank you, Phil.
Nice one.
Thanks, Phil.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
So, Councillor Jackson, you care to?
Sure, I will. Yes, I'm very supportive of this recommendation of separating into 2 different sections, the procurement and the fleet branch. I appreciate that Phil had the skills to manage both. And I think going forward, it's a good idea to have them separate because they are actually quite separate tasks. Fleet branch management has a kind of largely operational element to it. Procurement is very much about policy and ethics and process to ensure that all of council adheres correctly to procurement processes. I consider that an extremely important role of the people that have worked there, and Phil, of course, working there are really making sure that council operates in an ethical way and also in a way of getting best value for money for council. So the idea of having an additional staff member there and also a manager dedicated to making sure all our processes are not only up to date but followed is very important. So I'm supporting this restructure.
Councillor Pardon?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Phil for all his work. Over all the years, as the CEO said, he's a bit of a unique animal where he can
I think that's a compliment.
procurement and fleet. He can cross-pollinate across the lot. And not a lot of people have that particular skill. He's worked that out over time, and it's hard to replace that. So I think this is a good move forward. And look, if we look at it, the amount of tenders that we've got on the go at the moment and continue to roll out, that job's becoming bigger and bigger, on the capital work side, etc. So I think that we definitely need more resources and that skill set. So good work, Phil. Thank you. Support the motion before us.
Anyone else wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, please.
Oh, yes, certainly, Joe. Councillor Jerusalem.
Didn't you see me standing up?
Yeah, I'm happy to wait.
No, go on.
You have the floor, Joe.
I've got the bench and the floor and all of it here. Look, I'm equally supportive the comments made by Councillor Pardon there. I'm staggered to believe that someone as young as Phil is contemplating retirement and resigning from the council. Given his years of dedication and devotion to the process, I see that this is a restructure is necessary. He has carried his hand for council since we de-amalgamated well and Philly, and the challenges of council going forward can be well met with this new restructure to provide a little bit more clarity amongst the 2 branches that I support the move. Phil, I just hope that when you do retire, that you're enjoying as you enjoy it as much as I am at the moment. I'm about to go and fill in the fish, so I hope that's on your agenda for the future as well.
Thanks, Joe.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Yeah, I will. It's always very nice to thank staff. It's also good to roast them, and I'd just like to suggest there's no truth in the rumour that the reason Phil decided to retire was he was asked to do a cost-benefit analysis whether the fleet should go to hydrogen or electric vehicles.
Thanks, Brian.
But I do say, with all seriousness, that breaking up the position does mean that there can be someone in our organisation that does look at those decisions, which will be right on top of us for the next decade. So, wish Phil well. I will be looking at the budget to ensure that the capital works is at least $50,000 to something in there next year, because it's always interesting to see how the manager of finance and director, I should say, finds these innovative ways to find budgets for staff, and I fully support innovation when looking for new money, and I'm sure you'll help me with all my requests next year.
Assuming you're elected. Councillor Wilkie.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the opportunity to pay my respects to Phil. As a gentleman I've had the utmost respect for. He brings a great deal of intelligence and integrity to the role of procurement and fleet, and he has ensured that the processes have been ethical, open and transparent. That's very important. But also importantly, he has saved ratepayers countless millions over the years in terms of his capacity to seek out the best value for ratepayers and this council. And I'm sure the decision to break the role up into two parts will enable those decisions to have integrity and also deliver the best value for ratepayers.
Yeah, I'll say the same, Phil. Thanks for your time and all the best for your future endeavours, mate. You have been a vital key in the organisation, I realise, and you'll be very sorely missed. So, all the best.
Thanks, Jess.
Care to close, Councillor Jackson?
No, I don't.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Joe, can we hear your vote?
Aye.
He's gone.
Are you filleting?
We've lost him,
We've
so
lost
we
him,
can't
we can't
record his
vote.
vote. So it's everyone, with the exception of Councillor Jules.
Inaudible.
Inadvertently left the meeting. Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's special meeting. Thank you.